Bill straight up
I started working here.
It's expensive.
You all having a good time so far today? Another eventful Scots day? I want to welcome you to our beer tasting session. In this afternoon's session, Dr. Steve Monmouth will share more about the Eco Brewery startup Novo Beverage of Monmouth LLC. Steve graduated from Monmouth College in 1980 and went on to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where he received his DDS in 1985. Steve has owned and operated his own clinic here in Monmouth for over 28 years. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Steve and look forward to the tasting that we're going to partake in as well.
So anyway, like she said, I practiced dentistry, and then a hobby got kind of out of whack, and beer came out. I started when I graduated from Monmouth in 1980. My dad was teaching overseas for a year in Austria, and so we got to go visit and taste beer that wasn't Budweiser. You know, and so for the first time, you know, I was able to taste beers that had a variety of different flavors rather than everything tasting like one. Not that there's anything wrong with Budweiser, right? Still drink plenty.
Cold
What, no Schlitz?
Haven't had a Schlitz in a while. So, but anyway, I came back and you couldn't buy a beer of any flavor virtually anywhere. And so I started brewing in another Monmouth College alumni's basement with him, and we did that for 10 or 15 years. And then I was minding my own business, sitting in my dental chair, working on one of the professors here, a chemistry professor, who stated that he had thought about opening a brewery in town. I told him that was crazy talk, and went back to my business, and lo and behold, this is what came out of it. We brewed for, I don't know, 8 years probably in the basement of my dental office, and delivered to the bars and restaurants in town, and it was getting to be somewhat close to a job, and we were trying to decide whether we really wanted to continue. And the Gavins here in town came to us and asked if we would be interested in partnering with them and opening a restaurant in town. And I told them that I had wanted nothing to do with a restaurant, but if they took care of the restaurant side of it, Brad and I could brew some beer for them, and that's where we are now. It's the Patent Block Grill and Brew Pub downtown. So if you're hungry or thirsty or both, stop by and see us. Somebody earlier, Martha, I think somewhere, told me that she didn't like beer, and was I going to make her drink any? No, I'm not. But there are like 128 or 38 different styles of beer, and so until you tried all of them, you really don't know whether you like beer or not. And there's as much variety in beer styles and flavors and whatnot that you should never get bored drinking beer, because you can always find something that's a little different, and every brewer has a different take on how they do things. So I don't drink much beer anymore, or much alcohol anymore. So when I do drink a beer, I want something that I can enjoy, that's flavorful, and that's kind of where this came out. So, getting to the beer part, all beer, whether it's Budweiser or Guinness, which is a really dark beer, is basically made from the same thing. It's made from barley, it's made from water, it's got hops in it, and it's got yeast. So those four things, and whether, like I said, the same thing goes into all beers. It's just how it's brewed how you mix in the different kinds of malts, which is all the same seed. So we're gonna go through a variety of different styles and talk about, you can taste them. And what I would encourage you to do is pour a little bit in your glass, smell it first, right? And then you can taste it and let it sort of sit on your palate and float back. I think you've had a wine tasting and basically the same, I think. So we'll start off with the lightest of, okay.
All three?
No, you can't have your own bottle.
Do you have any cans?
I do that. So, I've got to get a glass. Okay, that's mine. This is an American wheat. So it's half barley and half wheat. Blue Moon is actually in Belgium, but it's similar. I don't know. Okay, now I want you to remember this because the next two beers after this have the exact same grain, hops, and everything in them, but we use a different yeast is used for each one. And so I want you to see if you can pick out, and you should be able to, because it should be fairly dramatic, the differences in flavor that the different yeasts will give. This was using an American yeast, which is a kind of a plain Jane yeast that doesn't offer much, if any, flavor to a beer. So if you smell it, drink it. Tastes a little bit like bread, right? There are no, for you chemists out there, no esters or anything that offer any different flavors. But we call that a lawnmower beer, or a gateway beer, gateway to craft beer. For people that don't like the real hard flavors, this will get them in the door. All right. Now the next one. This is one we haven't brewed for a while, so I had to go out to the store and buy some.
This is so good. It brings my son's a minister, and the parishioners in his church down by Champaign, they brew all the beer, and the University of Illinois comes and watches
This is
them.
made by, this is brewed by a group in Champaign. It's another one of the small breweries that have popped up over the last 10 years. It's one of my favorites. Okay, now smell it. Before you taste it, smell it. You gotta stick your nose way down in. You use your imagination a little bit. You can smell a little bit of clove or banana. Okay, this is a Hefeweizen. It's a German style wheat beer. There's a brewery in Germany that's been brewing this beer essentially for 500 years maybe. And all of the Hefeweizen use their yeast unofficially. They made the mistake, wheat beers generally are not filtered, and so you would buy a bottle from them, and at the bottom there was yeast, and so everybody took a yeast culture off the bottom of one of their bottles, so we all have wine chiffon is the name of the brewer, but taste it.
Did you say this was the same recipe except for the
Right. Same recipe, he's got the same, roughly the same hops and grain bill and everything. All wheat beers are about half barley and half wheat. The only difference between the first beer that you drank and this beer is the yeast strain.
So the yeast put the clothes in.
Well, there's some differences, but yeah. I mean, ignore the hops. But the flavor, that banana flavor, that clove flavor that's there, are esters that are made by the yeast. And it's the unique quality of that specific style of yeast. It's an ester. All right.
We can save some.
I know, but I'm trying to, I don't hate spoons.
Hey, we do have
It's kind of scary, right? There's nothing on here. Now we're gonna get confused, right?
Right, we need to.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, fine, come in.
Well, you're right in front of me. Okay, good. Can everybody in the back hear me okay? Yeah. Okay.
I was gonna say, it smells a little stronger and looks stronger.
Okay, now this one is a little higher gravity. We call it higher gravity, so it's got a little more alcohol in it. So ignore the alcohol. But again, it's made with half barley and half wheat, and a little bit of hops thrown in. But you ought to be able to taste a significant difference in there. This is made with a Belgian yeast.
Will you have any without cheese?
Yeah, I will. It's just we're using the wheat beer to sort of contrast the difference that hops can make, or that yeast will make in beer.
There's a beer, Prankster.
This was a beer that we brewed for the graduating seniors from out of college.
The high alcohol.
And it's got a little bit, you use your imagination again, it's got a little bit of a, we call it the dirty shoe, for lack of a better word. If you've ever had Boulevard's Tank 7, that's a sort of a farmhouse. And Belgian beers are sort of known for that weird sort of aftertaste that you get. And again, that's all in the yeast.
Is this one?
Yeah. I don't think they gave us. I don't think they gave us Belgian yeast. That's what something like this. I was out, on business.
Belgians are really
There's a beer called Prankster, P-R-A-N-Q, S-T-A-R, and it's very similar to Belgian yeast.
That only allows you to use water, actually it's water, hops, and barley. He had to get a special dispensation to use wheat for like the first one. And they didn't know about yeast at that time. I mean, yeast was undiscovered. So the Belgians use sugar, they use anything that they feel like that might, as a general rule, might ferment. And traditionally, the breweries were along the coast of Belgium, and they would pump their beer upstairs and then open the door. And they didn't use fermenters like we did. They were vats that were wide at the tops. They'd open the windows and let the breeze blow in, and that's where the yeast came from.
Where it was during they burned it with wood.
It did back then. I mean, now we're using culture.
You take, I don't know if you you take
So compare the three, and that's the difference in taste that you get from those three beers is almost all in yeast. And there are some minor variations, one that has a little more hops in it. But in general, and this one I know doesn't have any candy. It's just great. It's the Ode to 23, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. Kind of an odd.
okay, I'll buy
All right, moving along. Somebody asked for some non-wheat beer, so.
Wow, we've got unlocked.
Oh, you like crazy. Oh. That's that.
I really.
Next one, I'll go this way. Ready? Ready for the next one?
What was this one again?
He hasn't said it. It's the next one.
Oh, that's right. No.
Okay, now we're getting into a little more of the standard beers. This is an Irish style red ale that might equate to Killian's or one of those.
This is one of yours, right?
This is one of mine. Yeah.
And what the name is?
This is the Great Scott. Here, here.
So Killian's is trying to taste like Great Scott.
That's right.
Is it?
I've been brewing this beer, I brewed this in my basement for probably 30 years. This is one of my favorites. What's the alcohol content? This one is 4.5, maybe, thereabouts. The wheats, the first two were between 4.5 and 5, and the third one was probably 7. You know, when we're old guys and we like the taste of beer, but the alcohol gets a little old after a while. So most of our beers will be in the lower realm. Only 2 years for me to join you.
It'll happen.
Just remember, alcohol is a preservative. It'll help.
Right. So is hops. Hops is a really good preservative too. Any questions yet?
I noticed they're all cold. Do you always recommend beer be cold?
No, actually I don't. I think a good tasting beer tastes better warmer than colder.
It sort of hides the taste.
It does. I think cold hides the taste.
Ice
And,
cold is only for things like Budweiser.
right.
Which have no flavor.
I think that there are some, the wheat beers tend to taste better cold. This is a great beer warm. But I take this home, for me to drink at home, I don't put it in the refrigerator. Because I think it tastes better.
Stay awake to supper.
Cave.
And you'll also notice that, yes,
I was gonna say, what's the demarcation for when it's a good, better, cold versus?
I think good beer is always a better warm. You know, like they properly balanced age. And if you're truly drinking the beer that's flavored, a warm beer is a better idea of what the flavors are. If you're drinking, you know, if I'm coming in from Bowling Lawn, I don't want a warm beer. Because I'm not drinking it for flavor.
Well, wasn't that beer?
No, speaking about temperature too, in Europe, perhaps more than here, many of their beers are cask. And by cask, they're not as carbonated. They basically put a keg of beer in the basement, they open it up, and then they pump it out. And so if you ever watch Acorn TV and they go into the pub and they're sitting there pumping on their thing, that's the cask beer, and it's at cellar temperature, not necessarily room temperature, but it's cellar temperature, which is hopefully in the middle 60s probably. And every day it changes. You know, when they first tap it, it's fairly well carbonated, and by the end of the keg, it's not as well. But it's an interesting way. We're starting to see a few breweries around, not us necessarily, that are putting in a beer pump. They call it a beer pump.
And I have to go down getting my steps. Kinesiology class yesterday.
We got any hop heads here? People that like hops?
Not dating the juniors.
Hoppy, that's sad.
Oh, that's not true. You're the biggest procrastinator I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, now he's wanting to throw out the Barley house that we never put together for Andrea, like who's 40, turning 43 this year.
Well, that's the problem.
Christy got into it and tore the box apart and pieces scattered around. So it's not it was fully sealed box.
This beer does not have any wheat in it. It's purely made out of barley, hops, and water. The hops, most of them are Michigan hops.
Oh, let me smell.
Not much. Yeah, hops. It's soil, it's temperature. Hops is a unique plant. It's similar to, it's in the same family as marijuana and stuff, but it grows best right on the 47th parallel or longitude or whatever that is. Southern grown hops is not very good. I mean, there have been several people in Illinois that have tried, but it's just not as good.
My nose in it. Yeah, that's good. But I never want to drink it.
Yeah, I guess. But if you look at the great hop growing areas in the world, Germany, Czechoslovakia, England, and if you follow that thing over, it runs through the northeast, through Vermont, that kind of thing, and then Michigan, and ends up out in the Pacific Northwest of Oregon and Washington State. And that's where the best hops is grown in the whole world. And this is grown in Michigan, largely because I grew up in Michigan and I might as well buy it.
Obviously, because if I'm, the question over here is there's lots changing, as far as wine, okay?
Right.
Wine is going north,
Right? Bitterness happens when you boil hops for an extended period of time. And so this particular beer has no bittering hops in it at all. We transfer the wort over and start boiling it, and we get to the end, we're done boiling, we cool it down to 180 degrees or so, then we toss in the hops so that it has the maximum amount of flavor and aroma and as little bitterness as possible, right? So you get a taste of what hops in its true form kind of tastes like.
Does this have a Scots taste?
This is the hazy with a chance of hops or something. We have like 10 to 12. depending. One of the advantages to a small brewery is that we only brew it 50 gallons at a time, right? So the big guys, they may make 300, 400, 500 gallons at a time, and it's hard for it, they're only going to sell a certain amount. For us, we can keep a wide variety on because we're only making it 50 gallons at a time.
Very cool.
Okay? Now, the next one.
Where they grow the wonderful great whites. Have you guys ever been up to like I think it is, if I remember correctly, we're going to Michigan, and they have back. Are you thought I was friends? You?
Are you saying that if there were real college students here that
Yeah, okay, I was wondering, because I thought that was the plan. Yeah.
Said finish your meal.
Okay, so right.
This is a pale ale, which is the sort of the beer that launched craft breweries. Remember, Sierra Nevada came out with a pale ale, and this kind of is kind of in between an IPA. It's like a really calm IPA, but not really. It's got more bitterness than the East Coast IPA that you just tasted. And it's just barley wine or barley water, hops, and I mean it's just very basic beer, but it's one that really changed the landscape in the United States.
Sam Adams.
Sam Adams is actually Vienna.
Yeah, I know, but still, that was the first release.
Here in Texas,
Well, knowing I have to drive home, I could have the alcohol. I don't drink anything on the drive at all. I learned my lesson one summer in college. I was college age. I drank 6 ounces of beer. I don't know why I didn't like it, but I
hey, we
drank
were
6
talking
ounces.
about the smaller breweries. When I go into a
Drove down.
liquor store looking for beer,
Just nudged it. Didn't
I
damage
generally
it, but
go for the beers that
It's
have
like,
the label on
okay.
the can rather than printed on there, because you have to buy like 3 truckloads of labels of beer cans that are labeled that way, which means it's from one of the big guys, and they do a lot of beer. The smaller breweries all do labels around the outside. They have a mobile. The canning stuff costs a fortune, and you only use it, a day, a month, if that. And so they have mobile canning people that float in, and they pull their semi up to your brewery, and you run a line out there, and they can. So I generally go for the cans that have the label around the outside, because I know it's coming from a small brewery. Because I think that there are some real advantages to small breweries. One of which is, Founders Brewery.
Yeah.
Founders Brewery up in Ann Arbor or in Michigan. If you've ever tasted their beers, they all taste about the same, right? They taste about the same because they use the same water, the same yeast, and they modify some of the other things. But the amount and the type of hops that goes into it. Small breweries have the ability to change everything. Have you ever tried to make orange juice with Monmouth water? Not very good.
always. I grew up here.
And beer would be even worse than orange juice. So the smaller breweries have the ability of running all of their water through an RO, reverse osmosis that removes everything that's in there out, right? And then we can add the minerals to mimic the water sources of some of the major brewing hubs in the world. And so IPAs generally use really hard water because that's the kind of water that you get out of England. And so we can use the water profile in London, say, and then add the amount of minerals that are necessary to get that kind of water, and then make a beer so that it tastes fairly similar to what you would get if you were buying a beer out of England. The red ale that you tasted before has water that has been balanced to have the same essential mineral content as Dublin. Pilsners, Czechoslovakia has, which is where the style came out of, has very soft water, and so we don't add hardly anything to anything where we would be trying to mimic those. German beers, there's water profiles that are published for Dortmunder and Munich and all of those. So and I think that makes a big difference in the flavors of beer. And I hope we pride ourselves in that none of our beers taste the same.
That's true.
And it's largely a function of the fact that we're a small brewery, and so we have the ability to change things that the larger breweries don't. So. Yeah.
One of
about the difference between bottled, canned, and, tap?
Yeah, okay. Beer ages,
Well, if you're gonna pick a brand, any brand, doesn't make any difference, but bottled, canned,
Okay.
or tap. If I go to a bar, what am I gonna order and why?
okay. Beer ages, right? So you wanna find a beer that's reasonably young. The biggest, detriment to beer is sunlight.
Is what?
Sunlight,
Sunlight.
okay? So if it's kept dark, that's why most beer bottles are brown. I would personally steer away from beer that's stored in green or clear bottles, because if it's kept dark, if it's kept in a cellar, it's no big deal. But if they've got it sitting out on the bar, it's amazing how quickly that stuff gets funky.
Does that make Corona taste better with a lime?
What's that? That's probably why they put lime in it, is to cover up the funkiness. I think there are some advantages and disadvantages to tap beer. The issue that you have oftentimes when you go into a tavern is you don't know how long that beer has been on tap, right? And if it's a reasonably young tapping, you know, if they just tapped it, then it's a great beer to have. If it's been on there for a couple of months, I'm probably not gonna drink it. Cans are great. Used to be, you know, there was some, some folks that thought that bottles were the only way. Probably the single best way to preserve a beer is to put it in a can.
Really?
They've got coatings on the cans that are perfect now, and it's completely dark, so you don't have to worry about any change from sunlight.
Keep it out of the heat.
And heat is not as big a deal as sunlight. Sunlight is just horrible. So, and the tap thing, if you've got, I always ask, how long has that keg been on tap? You know, if you find one towards the end, you don't know. Towards the beginning, it's probably okay. And the bars and whatnot that have 750 beers on tap scare the crap out of you.
Yeah. Some of those.
Because you don't know how long they've been on tap. Yes.
So is it true that Guinness, in order to maintain the quality of their tap beer, they actually send inspectors like all over the place to like monitor the quality of the beer coming out of the tap? Or is that an urban myth?
I don't know, but I know that the Guinness is very particular about their beer. And if anybody was going to do that, it would be Guinness.
Do you have any porters or stouts?
I got Guinness.
I've never met this person before this.
Which is why.
That were me.
He or she knows to tell the truth. Grace said, but there are five. But you can't certify that. But you want to go downstairs and drink.
Can you ask for a sample of beer, like you ask for a sample of ice cream?
Sure. Most places do it.
Okay. See, I don't know since I don't drink it.
It sounds like a
Yeah.
Well, it's not actually.
Don't try
His
that.
question was that there are some tap systems that fill the glass from the bottom, right? And properly designed keg system doesn't need that. I mean, if you've got the keg system balanced well with pressure and everything, you should be able to pour a beer with very little gas. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, and so even at our place, we have some overflow, and that tends to keep it in the glass. One of the things you'll notice about our beers is that we don't carbonate them as much as others. Partially because I don't like a really heavily carbonated beer. I often, if I order a beer and it's too carbonated, I'll just stir the crap out of it to get rid of most of the carbonation. Because like real cold, real carbonation has a tendency to dull your taste buds and you can't really taste what the beer tastes like. Okay, the last beer that I have is Guinness.
Yeah, it'll be we have 40 minutes. Yeah.
That's summer business.
Somebody there in
I think it breaks down
I used to have a friend. A guy came around in a golf cart asked him how many he wanted. He would give that just a case to sit there right next to their chair. But it wasn't the same alcohol. So, when they did that in Ireland, I bet it was the same thing. They could sell that. Because where's that?
Yeah, she used to be able to just get free beer when you went years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure that that hurts case because like my grandmother heard that regularly had it. And I think you job at that time was to drive I did a lot of work on it.
So, are there any questions? I'm not a beer, so.
We're not.
How do you make this?
Guinness?
What fruit do you make? What makes it dark?
Dark beer is made from the same stuff that light beer is made. And so, I probably should have gone through that at the beginning, but we don't just use barley, we use malted barley, right? And malted barley, they take the barley seeds that are still alive, and they basically throw them on the floor and hose them down with water, and let them just start to germinate. Okay, and once they start to germinate, then they kill them. And how they kill them determines the type of grain that you have. If they use really low heat when they kill them, you get things like pilsners and whatnot. If they use higher heat, you end up with this lovely nectar. But the malting process, brewing is easy. The malting process is a real challenge from what they tell me. And that's where the real art comes in. And you have to, knowing exactly when to stop the process and how much heat to add and all of that kind of thing makes an absolute ton of difference in the flavor profile of the grain that we use. And we're indebted, every day we're indebted to the wisdom and the skill that the maltsters use.
How do you find them? Who are they?
Well, there's a few over in England and Germany have a few, and there's one up in Minnesota that breeds. They get grain from Minnesota and Canada and whatnot. They don't let anybody in. So, well, it's a secret, but it's you know, and you have to keep in mind that we use when we do the brewing process, we take the grain, we grind it up, right, and throw it in a vat and turn it into oatmeal, basically, and we're allowing the enzymes that are on the malted barley seed to change all of the starch into sugar. And so you start off with just plain water, and then by the time, in about an hour, we can turn 90% of the starch into sugar, and then you filter all of that back over and then boil it, and it turns into beer or Scots or whatever you want it to be. But yeah.
Why is this Guinness nitrogenated?
It's a different kind of, nitrogen is an odd one. I think that the reason that they put it in there, there's very little solubility of nitrogen in air, in water, right? So almost all of the nitrogen that they put in and carbonate this beer or that they put into the beer comes out when you open the can or bottle or whatever. And that's what, I think that they do that so that they get that nice head that you can cut with a fork, you know, on the top of the beer. Because it doesn't really add to the flavor, and it's all gone by the time you drink it. But I think that that's why they do it. Yes. What's that? It's downtown. It's called Patent Box Grill and Brew Pub. It's right by the Patent Box. It's right by the courthouse. On the square. Yes.
How do you buy malt? Do you specify when you're gonna make it?
Oh, yeah, there are a variety of companies that sell breweries like us malt. And the one that we use is out of Chicago. And
But
so,
do you specify like?
oh yeah, we tell, there's probably 100 different kinds of malt that you can buy. And how you blend that together determines the style of beer that you have, you know, among other things. Yeah.
So how do you get the fruity taste of some of the sours?
That comes from a different microorganism. The sours is a different animal, essentially. You brew beer and then there's some actual bacteria that you inoculate the beer with. Lactobacillus is one, and Brettanomyces is another. And so you toss in, generally what we do is, you have to be really careful with those, because once they get a hold of your brewery, everything tastes sour. And we had that problem when I was in the basement of my office. Yeah. And so the way we do it now is that we brew the beer, we leave it in the vat and cool it down, throw the bread in or the lactobacillus or whatever we happen to be using at the time, let it do its magic, and then we boil it again to kill it. So that we don't ever end up with that bacteria in our fermenter. Weinsteinhofer or something. Starts with a W. No. Yes.
So what is the difference between an ale and a beer?
Ale and beer are probably the same. Beer is just sort of a generic term for this type of beverage. In ale, uses ale yeast, which is a different species of yeast from a lager yeast. And the lager yeasts, they do their magic at a lower temperature, and it takes them forever to do it. So if you've heard of lagering, in general, you know, you would brew, you get rid of all of the alcohol and stuff, and they ferment at like 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and then you just leave them at 45 degrees to do their magic for another month or two before you pull them out. But it's actually a different species of yeast, and they tend to hit, lager yeast is fairly specific in the sugars that it will digest. It does really well with the shorter chain sugars, but it doesn't do terribly well with longer chain sugars. That's why ales, or you know, most of the beers that we've tasted, in fact all of the beers that we've tasted tonight are ales, and they're a little chewier, there's a little more body to them. Whereas if you drink Budweiser, it's going to be a little sharper and crisper because there's next to no sugar in those, whereas there's more sugar in them.
And what about a barley wine versus malt liquor?
Okay, barley wine is just a really, 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 really strong beer.
Okay.
Okay? You know, most beers are in 4 to 5%. The higher gravity beers might be 7 to 8%. You know, the stronger beers. And a barley wine might be up to 12, 14%, closer in alcohol content to what a wine would be.
Okay, so that's why it's called barley wine.
That's why it's called barley wine, right?
How do you get it that high?
It's a challenge. The yeast are not happy. They're not happy campers at all. So you end up having to repitch yeast. There are some strains of yeast that do better with higher alcohol. You know, the thing you have to keep in mind is that alcohol is poison to yeast. And so they will go along really happy for a while, and then all of a sudden their byproduct, the alcohol starts to slow them down, and then they say we're done. And they settle to the bottom, and that's the way most of them are. There are some champagne yeast, you know, will get you a little further. Sometimes you can throw in some of the enzymes that'll break the larger sugars down to smaller sugars, so that they'll do a better job. But we've done a couple of barley wines over the years, and it's a real challenge to get it ferment to completion because the yeast are not happy campers. Particularly, you know, once you get up to 8 or 10%, they're about ready to call it quit.
How do the Belgians get to the 8, 10, 11% for their trifles, the delirium tremens and St. Bernardus?
They use the yeast culture that's been developed over the years that's really tolerant to alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
They just
Yeah.
worked it out over centuries.
Right. I mean, you know, it's survival of the fittest, right? And so you get to 8%, and most of them dropped out, and so you collect the ones that are still alive, and you reculture those, and then you try it again, and this time you end up at 9%, and you culture those, and that's how they got there. Yes.
So, how do they make lambics? True lambics that are not just fruit flavored beer, but actually.
I've never made a lambic, so I'll qualify you with that. But I think it's there's a lot of sugar. You know, lambic is a Belgian style of beer that they often it's overpowered by the amount of fruit that they have in it. You know, there's some really famous ones that use raspberry and some others. If you've never tasted one, you ought to try it because it's really unique. But it's high alcohol. I don't know what they're 12, 14%. But they're really high alcohol, and I think that they use a variety of yeast strains that are tolerant to yeast, and then they use a lot of fruit extract and fruits and whatnot. So it kind of blurs the line between wine and beer.
Steve,
Yes.
Can you talk, one of the hot items out there now is sours. Can you talk a little bit about sours?
Sours are, is a beer that's been fermented normally, and then you generally add bacteria or a microorganism that changes some of the alcohol and some of the sugars into some of the acids, like acetic acid and oxalic acid, and there's a variety of them. And so it's hard for small breweries, like we've done a couple, but we do a kettle sour, which is you brew the normal beer, and then we leave it in the boil kettle, and then add the bacterial culture first, let it sour up real well, and then we ferment it after that, rather than doing it the other way around. And that gives us the advantage of being able to boil it afterwards, so that our whole brewery isn't contaminated with that nasty stuff. Because once that bacteria is set up in a brewery, it's really hard to get rid of. It doesn't take much to cause a lot of sours, and it's an aging problem. You know, it'll taste great today, but 2 months later, it's really starting to get sour. We've been through that in our brewery, and it's not fun.
So how'd you get rid of it?
We moved.
Okay.
We moved. Yes.
Is there anything unique about Foster's Lager, other than it being from Australia?
It's a nice beer.
Yeah.
It's a really good beer. It's not a true, it's a true lager, but it's not a lager in the same sense that Budweiser is. I believe it's a, same kind of lager that like a lot of Mexican beers are. They use an amber malt in there too. But it's a fantastic beer. I love that beer. It's a really good beer. But there's nothing unique about it other than the fact that it's brewed in Australia. It's beer for Australian beer.
Well, can we give a round of applause to We appreciate you sharing all this with us. Hopefully you can kind of pick out the ones that were your favorites, and now you know where you can maybe go find them, or get a growler for the road home or something. Right? For those that are for reunion dinners, we'll have